or incentive for improvement. Those who initiate the change will have better opportunity to manage the change that is inevitable. Good evening to one and all present here. I, Priyanka, on behalf of Institution's Innovation Council of Shahid Rajguru College of Applied Sciences for Women, University of Delhi, would like to welcome Mr. Vivek Shivaswamy, the speaker for today's session. We would also like to extend a sincere welcome to all the thoughtful and attentive audiences present here. IIC of Shahid Rajguru College has organized this session on the topic Prototype, Process Design and Development. We are honored to have Mr. Vivek Shivaswamy as our speaker for today's session. Mr. Vivek is passionate product professional with 9+ years of experience building and scaling tech products in consumer. He is an alumnus of IIM Bangalore and NIT Surathkal. He is a recognized content creator on LinkedIn. Part of the inaugural batch of LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program in India and winner of the Graphic Creator Grant. We would now like to welcome Mr. Vivek Shivaswamy to enlighten us about the topic. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, hi, Priyanka. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Just give me a second. Okay. So, how is everyone doing? All good? Apologies, I think there was some confusion in the morning with the timing, so couldn't join. So, let's get started. Let me bring up my screen. Okay, let me know when you all can see my screen.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, got it. Okay, so today we'll be discussing on a very interesting topic, right? Basically about prototypes and product development and how this is important in the journey of an entrepreneur or a product manager, or if someone who wants to, get into the product industry as a whole, right? So we'll start with a small quote, right? I think all of you would have heard about this famous quote of a picture is worth 1,000 words. How a picture can describe a lot of different emotions, a lot of different qualities of the painter, or even if you have to explain something to an audience, how a picture can help you convey the message better, right? So similarly, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. When you map the same to a corporate world, or if you are an entrepreneur and you're somewhere in an investor meeting, or you're talking to your uh, top management or stakeholders, how can you make sure you convey what you're trying to build in a better way is through prototype, right? So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, prototype is worth 1,000 meetings, right? So with that quote, we'll start with the today's session. So this is the rough agenda. So again, if anyone wants to understand something more, we can pause and deep dive. But at a high level, want to cover some of these topics, right? So what is a prototype? Where is it used? What are its benefits, right? And what are the different types of prototypes? We'll also look at some examples of prototypes and how they are used. And I think the second part, or the second chapter, is more interesting. We'll look at how a product manager or a founder goes about building a product, what are the different stages involved, and how people used to build products a while ago and how they're doing it now, and what's an MVP, like what's the difference between a prototype, MVP, and also POC. We're going to look at that, right? And finally, we'll end with some very interesting examples, which all of you would have come across, right? So that'll give you a good understanding on what is prototype, what is MVP, what is the difference, and how are these used in the real world, right? So with that, let's get started. Anybody has any idea what exactly is a prototype? Before I start, you want to take a shot? Feel free to unmute, or you want to put down your answers on chat. Should be good. What do you understand by the word prototype?
Maybe a working sample of the final product.
Exactly. Anyone else?
Preliminary model.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think more or less you got it right, right? So a prototype is an early sample or a model or release of a product, right? But just built to test the concept or the product. It is not the final product or a service which you're building. It's just your first sample or your idea put on to a piece of paper which you want to test out, right? It's more like an experiment of sorts. So what it helps with is to go about validate your idea, validate different processes, the steps, the user journeys, right? And how can you make sure you improve the product before even it is launched, right? So what happens in real world is today, um, customers, especially, you can, this applies to both B2C and B2B, right? Customers do not wait. In olden days, people used to say, okay, I want this particular product, and company used to take 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and then they build a product and they give it to them, right? But today it doesn't work in the world of software product management, right? Or software entrepreneurship, right? You have to show the customer what is it that you're doing, right? Or you have to show your investor, this is my concept, this is the idea, and I feel this is going to work, right? You have to show and tell rather than saying that I'm going to build everything and at the end I'm going to give you this product and this will work, right? So the lot of advantages in this process. Basically, if you start talking about your product with some samples, examples with your customers, they're going to give you early feedback, right? What that means is you are validating your hypothesis. So you had an idea in mind and you knew that it was going to work, but you don't necessarily, or you can't be sure that it is going to work, right? So how do you validate this? You build a small prototype, right? You go to your customers and show them and take feedback from them and start iterating. You would have thought, okay, this is going to work. They might say, no, this is not useful to me. I need something else, right? So you start iterating your product at before even it's pushed into your development phase, right? So that's where prototype comes in very, very handy, right? So uh, I think before we look at different types of prototypes, this concept is very, very important, right? I'm not sure if you've heard the concept of design thinking. But again, this is I would say this is something which has become more prominent in the last 5 to 10 years, especially in software product companies, right? And prototype is typically a stage in design thinking, right? So what happens is the concept of design thinking talks about a customer centric or a human centric design process, right? Which typically brings up collaboration between different stakeholders in a team, and they do a process of iteration wherein take up a pain point, right? Empathize with the user's needs, then they define one uh, problem which they want to solve. They ideate and come up with solutions. They prototype it and they test it with the users, right? So this process of design thinking varies from 5 days to 5 weeks, right? Different companies follow different timelines. So we typically do 5 days war room kind of a setup, wherein day one we look at the problem, day two we define it, day three we ideate it, day four put up a small prototype, and day five we actually test it with customers, right? So this is a simple 5 day design thinking process, and different stakeholders come into this meeting, right? It can be product managers, it can be engineers or developers, then there are designers, and also few potential users, which will typically bring them in at day four or day five, right? You need not involve them day one. So this design thinking process, again, like I said, can vary from just 5 days is like a fast-paced design thinking process, right? Typically employed in companies like Google and other fast-paced startups, but it can also uh, expand into 5 weeks where a larger team is working, and here the prototypes can be much bigger, wherein you have, let's say, a clickable prototype, right? Wherein you have put together a proper high fidelity designs, and you have created a clickable prototype which customers can actually try out, right? And today the availability of tools makes it possible to do all of that, right? So one key takeaway is that's how the concept of prototype became very, very prominent, right? So the concept of design thinking introduced this 5 step approach or 5 step model, wherein you do a small experiment, right? Which will help you understand what are the key pain points of the users, right? It's always focused around your customers or your end users, right? What are they looking for? What are the pain points? What is the current status quo? And what we are building, is it right for them, right? So to test that, this concept of design thinking came into picture. And earlier, the owners of coming up with ideas usually was, let's say, with founders or the product team, right? This process also brought in a collaborative approach, right? Wherein different stakeholders, because everyone brings different perspective, right? uh, a product cannot be built alone by one person, right? You have to bring in different stakeholders. Each of them comes with a different set of skill set, right? They contribute from their own expertise, right? From their own skill set. So this concept of design thinking brings everyone together. It adds collaboration, right? And it helps you to uh, eliminate ideas which you would have found to be useful, right? So it's an experimentation process typically used to identify, validate hypothesis which someone, let's say a product team or a design team, has in the mind, right? So that's where prototype or the concept of design thinking fits into the prototyping, right? Now looking at the benefits of prototypes, I think I've discussed few of them already, right? So the first one, the basic one, is validating ideas, right? I told you about the story wherein it used to take like 1 to 3 years to actually build a product and then deliver, right? With the help of prototypes, you can actually get early feedback in the process, and make sure whatever the product you are building is the right fit for the stakeholders, right? So you give the product to your users, ask them to use it, and then come back with the feedback, right? This helps in it saves a lot of cost because you are sure that you're going to develop a product which will be used by the users, right? You're just not going by your hypothesis. That's very very important, and this is all something we have been doing right now in our company, right? So we are at a stage wherein we built a lot of prototypes, we're getting feedback, right? Also building the product in the process, but this feedback wherein you interact with the customer. So there are two ways in which you can interact with your customers, right? One is you go do a survey, you go do an interview. That is more of a discovery session wherein you don't have anything with you, right? But like I said, no, a prototype show and tell method gets you much better feedback, more quality feedback, because they're actually seeing something, right? So this concept is also called as usability testing. If you want to um, know more about the concept, it's basically going with a couple of UX prototypes, right? And getting feedback from the users. So this can work in a closed environment or even in a remote setup. There are a lot of tools which help you do that. You can upload a clickable prototype, let's say from a Figma tool, onto a particular tool, and it will capture the analytics on how users use that particular prototype, right? How do they navigate from screen to screen? Where are they clicking? Where are they spending more time? It gives you analytics. So that is more like a remote way of doing it. Or you can do a closed environment setup where you are also in the room and you just observe the customers, right? So here, uh, basically one important thing you have to remember is in prototypes, you don't tell the customers what you do. You give them and ask them to see how they're going to navigate and get feedback, right? So that's where the concept of usability testing comes into play. Then collaboration, obviously, I think the concept of design thinking, with that I've covered this, so I'll not spend more time. It helps your team to collaborate because you have something actually to see, and everyone knows what we are building, right? Then this one is very important, right? Attracting investors or stakeholders. Like, so here probably I would want to give an example, right? I like this is a couple of my friends. They actually created a simple landing page where they talked about a concept which they wanted to do, right? And they put a simple show interest button over there, and they received a lot of interest regarding the product which they were talking about. And that interest they took, right, and they pitched to the investors, and they raised their first seed round of funding. So you can imagine, just with a one pager, uh, website which you can classify as prototype, they were able to raise seed funding, right? This is the power of prototypes, right? There was no product, there was nothing, right? No one was using anything. And if you've heard of Kickstarter or uh, even I think Product Hunt to a point, right? All of these play around the concepts of prototyping, wherein, let's say if I want to raise money to build something, right, I put out my concept in the form of, let's say, so even putting out demo videos is a form of prototype, right, wherein you're getting interest onto your concept, right? So you put out your prototype and try to get early interest from your potential customers or potential users, right? And in a way you are also raising funds to what you want to build. So prototypes are a very important, uh, I would say, tool to do that, right? And typically, if let's say you're not raising funds or investing, you're in a big company, prototypes help you convey clearly the message to your important stakeholders. Let's say your CEO or your top management, and you're working as a PM, right? So prototypes will help you. Okay, this is, hey boss, this is what I'm trying to build, right? And this is how it would look like. I feel this is going to solve a huge problem, and you can look at very very early screens of the prototype, right? And it's very easy to communicate with your other stakeholders instead of going with a PPT full of words, right? Prototypes help you convey the message well as well. And finally, I think resource planning. This is more like an uh, outcome of prototype, wherein, let's say you're building a project. If you know what you're building, right, you have a rough idea, this is how it would come like. based on that, you can devote resources, right? Plan resources. Let's say, I need 2 dev, I need 2 UX, I need 2 testers, I need. So that is also something you can do with the help of a prototype, right? So any questions here? Anything you're not able to understand, or even something not related to this?
Hi, Vivek, sir. So you gave this example of raising funds. Is
Correct.
it still that easy given that we are in funding mentor?
It's not. See, that was one example, right? Let's say 20-25 people would have tried that. One or two would have raised a fund, right? But what I was trying to highlight is more um, the power of this show and tell process, wherein you're talking about your concept and showing them this is a prototype of it, and that could gather a lot of interest, right? So what helped them was getting, I think they received around 5,000, 6,000 plus people who showed interest to their concept, right? Uh, I think one of their posts went viral and they got a lot of traffic to their landing page and they were able to garner a lot of interest, right? So they leveraged that and you were able to raise funds easily that time. But again, landscape has changed. But this example is something you need to, like, what the takeaway is. It always helps when you're uh, showing something to the users, right? Even when it's about raising funds or conveying the message to stakeholders, the show and tell method or having a prototype ready always helps, right? Okay, so let's move on, right? Now we'll talk about different types of prototypes, right? And we'll also look at some of these examples, right? So very high level, you can classify it into low fidelity, high fidelity prototypes, right? And there is one more which is called medium fidelity. We'll look at it. Um, Typically, what used to happen, let's say someone had to talk about a concept 5 or 10 years back. There weren't many tools which you could use to easily build prototypes, right? So low fidelity prototypes were the only ones. So this was like the go-to option for everyone to go about, you know, sketch your thoughts, sketch your ideas on a piece of paper using a pencil, right? And you go and discuss with your team members, your stakeholders, your customers, right? So this primarily helped at a high level in brainstorming and collaboration between team members, right? So this was the purpose of the prototypes, when at least when it started, or when it was the concept of prototype itself was invented, right? So low fidelity prototypes are something which you always should remember. And let's say you're a PM or you're a founder, whenever you are in your initial stages, let's say you're building a product from scratch, low fidelity prototypes, you just take up a sticky note or you just take up a whiteboard and you start putting what is in your mind and discuss with your team. So low fidelity prototypes primarily used for discussion, right? So this is something which won't go out, let's say to your investors or your top stakeholders, primarily used for collaboration, right? This won't even go into your presentation. So today's world, low fidelity prototypes primarily for brainstorming and discussion. And these are some examples, right? Like you can see some designs which are made on piece of paper, right? Both right one is on a sticky note. Then comes the medium fidelity prototypes. These are mostly black and white film prototypes, right? They are also called as wireframes. Not sure if any of you are aware of this tool called Balsamic, right? So Balsamic is very easy to use tool and typically used by product managers or even entrepreneurs to easily put together their concept, right? So this is a free tool. I would recommend every one of you to go ahead and try it out, right? So this is a prototype which gets into initial presentations, right? When you're talking about a concept, right? So there are no colors. It's very plain, simple, and there are ready-made, drag and drop um, graphics like these, right? If you want an outline of a mobile phone with Android, iOS, if you want an outline of a website, everything is available. You drag up, you can search. It's very easy to use, right? Balsamic is one option. There's, I think, storyboarding in PowerPoint. This is an inbuilt tool which was recently launched, right? So you could also use the storyboarding, and this is something you use to convey the message clearly. Let's say you want to work on a new idea, right? And you want to get approvals, or like I said, investor presentations, or you are at the initial stages of your product discovery with your customers. So this will help you do the discussions much better, right? So this is something you call as medium or media fidelity prototype, right? So this is something you have to remember. Then comes the high fidelity prototypes. So one difference between medium and high fidelity prototypes is medium fidelity prototypes, something which is done by, let's say, a product manager. So you're working in a company and you are in a product manager role. Medium fidelity or even low fidelity, expected that you will be able to put together, right? And high fidelity prototypes are like closer to the final version of your product, right? I was uh, previously talking about the clickable prototypes, right? So what clickable prototypes mean is it'll um, help you experience the product how it would be if it was built using technology, right? Let's say I have built a registration login screen with just the UX. You will be able to put in your username, password, you log in, you can experience that without any technology behind it, right? So that's what clickable prototype is. You just have to connect different screens, and you have to add CTAs on each of the screen which you have built. So tools like Figma, Sketch, this will help you do the clickable prototypes. So as a skill set, I would recommend this to be learned, even if you're a product manager or uh, let's say founder, right? Helps you put together. And this is also very simple, right? There are drag and drop, there are a lot of templates available, so which we can use, right? And but like, let's say in a real world situation, typically UX design teams take up this task, right? Let's say you are in a product company and you're building a product. You have defined what is your expectation in terms of what product you want to build, right? And you've drawn some mockups or put together some wireframes, the previous two versions, right? And you hand it over to the design team, and design team will come up with this final designs or the high fidelity prototypes, right? So it's very important to note the distinction or differentiation between these two, and what phase of the product development you use these prototypes, right? Paper pencil, initial stages, discussion, brainstorming, right? Convey high level your thought to other stakeholders, right? Medium fidelity, using tools like Balsamic or storyboarding. Black and white, concept, typically used in presentations, right? To convince your top management or your investors. Finally, high fidelity prototypes. These are clickable prototypes, typically done by UX design teams much later in the product development life cycle. When you've validated your concept, your hypothesis is clear, you know that you're going to go ahead and build this product, right? That's when you involve UX design teams, and they'll put together a very nice looking prototypes. And this is something which will go to your customers for testing, right? For that early feedback, right? So typically this is a stage where you go ahead and do usability testing, right? I told you about the concept of usability testing. So usability testing is done using the high fidelity prototype. So in Figma, you can get a clickable prototype link which can be shared with um, all your potential customers, or let's say you're using an analytics tool to capture their feedback, right? You can just put a Figma link on that analytics tool, and then ask them to use the product, right? And then it will give you the analytics on what they liked, what they didn't like, where they spent time, so all of it, right? So these are different types of prototypes. Any questions here? Okay, I think before this, yeah. Any questions on types or prototypes? Any of you use this somewhere in your courses? No? Okay. So next slide, I would want you to answer, right? So there are these three terms which most of you would have heard of, right? If you're exploring product management or entrepreneurship, right? So we discussed about prototype, but there are two other keywords which sound very similar to what a prototype is. So one is a proof of concept, other one is MVP or a minimum viable product, right? So what are your thoughts? What are these, and how are they different from prototype? Any idea? Anyone wants to take a shot? No one?
I would like to answer, sir.
Yeah.
Not exactly, but I think POC, looking at onto your slide, means that whether the idea that you're thinking is feasible or not, and like it would make out something as a product or not. And coming to MVP is basically what product you have made would work out into the market or not. I guess so.
Okay. Okay. Almost there. Any other thoughts? No. Okay. So I'll try and answer, right? So POC is typically done by development teams, right? So if you are a product manager or a founder, you are not typically involved in POC, right? So proof of concept is the uh, process of verifying if a certain um, technology will help you solve a particular problem, right? Let's say you are building a registration and login module, right? Now, you as a product manager have defined that you have to do social sign-in. As a social sign-in, sign in through Google or Facebook or Apple, right? So you have defined that as a requirement, right? Now, what the technology team will go and do is, okay, how can I build a, uh Facebook login or a Google login into my product, right? So they will do a small POC using whatever uh, technology which is available, right? So typically there are different ways you can do it. So there is a platform called Cognito, or there's a platform called Amazon SCS, right? So these platforms will help you basically do a social sign-in, right, through Google or Facebook to your platform. So development team will go ahead and do a POC using different platforms, right? Someone will use Cognito, someone will use Amazon SCS, and then they'll capture a report, right? I've done a POC. I feel Cognito works better when I'm doing a social signing, right? So that's what a proof of concept is, right? It's again a form of prototype for the development team, right? I think prototype we have discussed UX and UI. MVP is the final version, working version of your product. So that's the main difference, right? Prototype need not be functional. What we discussed, UX screens, it can be clickable prototypes, it can just be on a piece of paper. That's for prototype. MVP is a functional working product, right? And why we call it as MVP is it doesn't have any huff and fluff. It has your basic functioning product. What that means is, let's say you want to we are talking about this registration and login, right? As a PM, we have defined we want email login, we want OTP based login, we want social logins, all of this, right? But to get your user onto the platform, you just need one login, right? So email based login, let's consider, because everyone uses email more than OTP, or if you prefer OTP based login, you pick one and you provide one particular type of login to your product. That becomes your bare minimum feature for a login. Someone should be able to log into your platform. You can do that with just one, right? You don't need social logins, you don't need OTP based login, you don't need email login altogether, right? That will come in your next versions of the product. MVP, you're just verifying, okay, someone has to log into my platform. How can they do that? They can do that using one method, right? So that's the difference between MVP, right? The first version of your product. And MVP comes at a very later stage than the prototype, right? When you have a working model. And so this is where you call as a beta launch, right? So where you identify a set of users and give them access to your first version of the working product, and you do a beta launch, and they'll start using the product, and you would have uh, basically put together the analytics tool as part of your MVP, which will start capturing analytics, user analytics on how they use your product, right? So that's the major difference, right? Any questions here? I think second chapter I'll probably quickly go through. Our main focus was on prototype, but this chapter is more on MVP and why it's very important for you all to know about MVP, right? So we'll look at some very interesting examples of MVP. But before moving into MVP, you need to understand the product development life cycle, right? So design thinking is an experimentation process, right? It's something temporary, what you use to validate your ideas. Whereas a product development, you might think that the stages or the steps sound the same, but it's not. So product development life cycle is more of a life cycle through which you deliver your product to the customers, right? Design thinking is an experimentation process where you validate your hypothesis, eliminate ideas, right? In product development life cycle, you chart out how you're going to build and deliver your product, right? You brainstorm, you define, design, you test it, and you launch it, right? So that's the major difference. And product development life cycle is something you have to remember. Any founder, any product manager will be going through this day in and day out, right? If you're in a brainstorm phase, all your team will be looking at, okay, what you're going to build, what problem are you going to solve, define. You have defined what problem you'll solve. You'll be looking at how you're going to solve it, right? Design, you basically put together the concept, you develop it, right? You take the MVP, then you test it, then finally you launch it, right? So that's the high level stages here, right? Next comes, yeah, I think I talked about it, but just from the concept perspective, right? You need to understand these models, right? So in the product development life cycle, well, there are two models. One is called as waterfall, other one is agile. I'm sure all of you would have heard the word agile, right? So waterfall is nothing but when I gave the example of like take the requirements and 2 years later I'll give you a product, right? So that's something which used to happen a lot, and it still happens in, let's say, manufacturing companies, but not anymore in software companies, right? Because everyone wants something, a product fast, right? So if you look at this example of boat, right? They had uh, built a boat, they had built a boat, but they're not planned for all the situations, all the scenarios, right? So they thought the river stream will always be, you know, uh, still, or it'll just be going in one direction, right? But when they approached a wave, right, the boat actually broke, and they somehow survived it with what they have. So if they had followed an agile model, this is something where they could have iterated at this particular point. Let's say this plan, build, test, launch, right? The PDLC steps which we looked at, they could have put a pause, gone back, change the requirements, and then start rebuilding again, right? So that iterative process is called agile, right? So that's something you have to remember. No difference between waterfall. This is still followed in manufacturing companies, right? But wherein the requirements are huge and there's a lot of hardware related work, right? But in software companies, you don't do this anymore. It's not like a customer will tell you, give me this product, and after 1 year you turn up to them saying, here is your product. That's not how it goes, right? You keep delivering in phases, you keep iterating, right? The customer will say after 3 months, no, I don't want this, I want something else, right? So you should be able to adapt to the changing customer needs. And that's what agile is all about. It's an like iterative approach, right? This is still new. 2001 it was formed, and it was very effective in a lot of software companies, and that's when it became very popular, right? So at regular intervals you take feedback from the customer and you keep altering your uh, product's scope or the product requirements, right? I think high level that's something which will help you, right? I won't go into much detail. If there's any question, I'll discuss. Now, I think we spoke about MVP a little bit. We'll look at some interesting examples and then we'll probably break for questions, right? So this is very simple example for an MVP, right? Like if you had to build a car. So again, it's not about building a car, it's about the problem statement you're talking about, right? Let's say you have to go from point A to point B and you need to build a vehicle for that. Then how do you go about building MVP, right? So the first MVP is you build a skater board, then you build um, skater board with handle, then you build a cycle, then you build a bike, then you build a car, right? So that's like a real world example of an MVP. Is it need not always be, I'll just give you a tire, right? So MVP should be a functional product, right? So that's something I always have to keep in mind. MVP doesn't have any of the fancy features. It's just giving a bare minimum, right? So MVP is the next level to what we talked about in prototype, right? What, why, and how, like why MVP helps, right? It's the first release of the products. Again, it's used for getting feedback, right? Initial, before even you go ahead and build whatever you had planned for your product, you just validate with your early set of features, right? Limited resources, launch quickly, learn quickly. So that's the concept with which MVP works, right? You don't want to spend too much money before even validating, okay, this is something which is going to work. Prototype, you're just taking feedback. People won't be able to experience the same thing which they're going to experience with a working product, right? In a prototype, these are just concepts. And even with clickable prototypes, you won't be able to address all the edge cases, right? It's just a happy path is what you're going to build with a clickable prototype, right? So that's something you'll have to remember. So some examples we'll look at, right? I think these are very popular companies all of you would have come across, right? So Airbnb's first MVP was this, what you see on the left-hand side, right? Today, Airbnb, if you go and look, there is like so many features. There is an interactive map and you can zoom and you'll see a lot of places which are around that particular place you are zooming, right? But what they did first as part of Airbnb, right? They used their own apartment, right? They had not talked to any of the hosts which are there on the platform today, right? Used their own apartment and they reached out to family and friends. Hey, you want to come and stay in our apartment, right? We have built a small product. Go through it, book, specify your dates. You can come and stay. There's no online payments. They used to collect cash after and the guests stayed and then they left. There was no map view. They used to just drop a pin, the location. It was taking the user to Google Maps, right? Very, very simple, skeletal, only outline, just to validate the concept, right? So this is what Airbnb did. So if you look at Airbnb's website today or even the app, it's much, much complicated, right? So that's how you validate your product when you first launch in the market, right? So what this helps with, we just discussed, right? You don't have to put in a lot of resources, right? And developing an MVP will not take a lot of time. Instead, if you want to build, like, let's say Airbnb's app today or the website today, if you thought, okay, I'll build everything, I'll wait till everything is built and I'll launch, by the time someone else would have come and launched the same thing, right? So today's market, you have to be fast, you have to be quick, you have to scope, and this is the job of a founder or a product manager, right? You need to know when. So there is this concept of scope creep. So what it means is, uh, product managers become so obsessed with the ideas that they want to build everything, right? Build all amazing features they have thought of, but that can become negative because you will waste a lot of resources. It's time consuming. You'll put in a lot of money. There's a lot of cost involved, right? Instead, it's very important for you to put together just first version, right? A basic MVP. Go to the market, right? I think there is one quote, forgot by whom, but like, if you're not ashamed of the first version of your product, right, then you're too late. So what that means is, MVP is just, it doesn't have to look really good. It's all about verifying your idea, right, with the actual customers. So that's how it has to be. So this was one famous example, one local example, which most of you would have heard of, right? Misho. So Misho ran its operations on WhatsApp and Google Sheets for many months before they even built their first application, right? So I think even Zomato or Swiggy has very similar story, right? They used to accept orders on WhatsApp. So uh, manually, the founders verified the concept first, right? Okay, this is something which is going to work, right? Um, they used to log them in Google Sheet, and to fulfill every order, they had to go through a courier website and manually process bank transactions, right? So this is the MVP for Misho, right? There was no app, there was no product. They managed everything on WhatsApp and Google Sheets, right? So this is like the power of MVP, where you can actually go around building businesses without even having to build a sophisticated, complex product, right? Uh, nice looking, sophisticated product comes later. What's basic is, okay, I have a concept in mind. I How do I verify and validate that this is going to work, right? You obviously start with a prototype. They would have done all the research, shown them different prototypes, right? Now this is something we're going to build. We got the validation. Then they would have launched this particular, process, right? Wherein they used to accept orders on WhatsApp, log them in Google Sheet, and then deliver through courier websites and bank transactions. Everything was done manually, right? So this is one very good example of MVP, which you all should remember. And the last one is the most famous one. I think all of you would have heard of this, right? Facebook. So this was Facebook's MVP. I'm not sure if any of you would have seen this, would have joined, but this was the MVP of Facebook, right? This was back in 2004, I guess. Yeah. So Zuckerberg created the early MVP of Facebook just for Harvard University, and this is how it looked. It was a simple web directory which contained photos and names of all the students in the university, right? And that's how the MVP was done for Facebook. And today you all know how big Facebook is, right? So yeah, I think that's what we had for today, right? First, wanted to cover only prototypes. Then I thought you need to know about both prototypes and MVP. It's very important. PDLC also is an important part of the process. But yeah, idea was to put everything into perspectives, right? It's not just our prototype, how exactly prototype is leveraged and what happens next, right? So that's it from me. Any questions? Happy to take. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I also write a newsletter on product management. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I keep writing content on products and startups. So if you want to connect or follow there, please feel free to do that. And newsletter, more like a weekly or bi-weekly ones, especially if you are preparing for product management, you will find it useful, right? I'm creating more like a step-by-step guide for someone who wants to get into product management. So if you're planning to get into product management, you will find the newsletter useful. If not, happy to connect on LinkedIn, and if there are any queries in future, you can reach out. So yeah, that's it from me. Any questions? Happy to take anything on what we discussed today or anything you haven't understood in general. Feel free to pitch in.
Thank you so much, sir, for delivering such an amazing session. It was indeed very informative. If anyone has any questions, you could kindly post it in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask from sir right now.
No questions? Either everyone understood everything or no one understood anything. One more thing you have to, if you are planning to get into entrepreneurship, want to become an entrepreneur, or you want to get into product management, you have to be very curious. You have to ask a lot of questions. Right? You need to understand the space well. You have to cross question each and everything which you come across. So asking questions is a skill you'll have to learn.
So I guess we do not have any questions, or they
Sure.
might be hesitating asking here. So we'll be posting your LinkedIn profile into the group that we have for the sessions. You could connect with sir via his profile and ask your questions through the DMs. Now, sir, ending with the session, the institution's Innovation Council extends sincere gratitude to you, sir, Mr. Vivek Shivaswamy, for taking out time from your busy schedule and joining us, sir, after the mess that happened in the morning. So this session has truly helped in increasing our knowledge about the topic prototype process design and development. We extend our deepest gratitude to our principal ma'am, Dr. Payal Meko, for being our pillar of support and strength. Last but not the least, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the audience for showing keen interest into the topic and joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining in, everyone. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye. IIC members are requested to kindly stay into the meet.